Hi everyone, we're Mimicker,
Yeah.
here to introduce all kinds of knowledge, even the stuff we didn't know about. Welcome to The Deep Dive, the show where we take a stack of sources, articles, research, our own notes, and really try to pull out the most important nuggets of knowledge, the key insights, just for you. Today we're diving into something truly fascinating. It's a universal experience, I think, that might just redefine how you think about your own understanding of the world. Have you ever felt totally confident you understand how something works? Like completely sure.
hmm
Only to then, when someone asks you to explain it step by step, you just fumble. You feel completely lost.
Oh, absolutely. Happens all the time.
Right, it happens to all of us.
Yeah.
And today, we're going to use a surprisingly profound concept, something we've playfully termed the toilet theory, as our sort of entry point into some really deep psychological insights. Our mission today is pretty unique, actually. We're using an everyday, almost boringly mundane object. Yes, the toilet as a lens to explore the intricate workings of the human mind.
Yeah, and not just the mind, but the very nature of our knowledge and the surprising architecture of our beliefs.
It might sound like a bit of a stretch using a toilet for all that, but trust me, this is where it gets incredibly interesting.
And to expand on that mission, our goal isn't just to talk about toilets, obviously. It's to truly extract those key nuggets about why we often think we know what we know. Why are we sometimes so quick to believe what we believe? And crucially, how can we maybe cultivate a more accurate, perhaps more humble understanding of the world around us?
Right.
This deep dive should offer you some shortcuts, some ways to become truly well-informed about core cognitive biases that, frankly, affect every single one of us every single day.
And to guide us through this illuminating intellectual journey, we've pulled insights from a fantastic piece of analysis. We've titled it The Toilet Paradox, an expert analysis of the illusion of understanding and the psychology of belief. In this document, it takes what seems like a simple, almost funny observation and really unpacks it into a rich, robust discussion. It blends insights from psychology and even a bit of philosophy.
It really does. It's quite comprehensive.
So yeah, get ready to look at your bathroom in a whole new light. Okay, let's unpack this then. Let's start with what we're calling the toilet theory.
Right.
This concept, it basically highlights a very common, almost universal human tendency. We tend to drastically overestimate how well we understand everyday objects. I mean, think about it. When was the last time you truly broke down the mechanics of, say, a zipper? Or a refrigerator? Or, yes, a toilet?
It's usually just background noise, isn't it? We use them, we don't think about them.
Exactly. So imagine this common scenario, and I bet you, listening, can relate. If you were to stop people, just randomly, and ask them, do you understand how a toilet works?
Most would say yes, right?
Oh, absolutely. The vast majority, nearly everyone, would confidently say, yes, of course I do. I use one every day.
That confidence is the starting point.
But then, if you press them a little, if you ask them to explain, in detail, step by step, the actual causal mechanism.
But what exactly happens when you push the handle?
Precisely. How does the tank fill back up? How does the flush actually release the water? What happens after it goes down the drain? Suddenly that confident yes just evaporates.
Yeah, it crumbles pretty fast.
It's often replaced by stammering, maybe some vague hand gestures, or even just awkward silence. And this shift, this immediate plunge from feeling like you've mastered it to just utter confusion.
That's the core contradiction.
That is the core contradiction that the toilet theory captures so cleverly. It's the moment the illusion just breaks down.
What's truly fascinating here, I think, is that this isn't just a quirky anecdote. It's not just a fun party trick you can pull on your friends. The real profundity of this observation lies in how it fundamentally challenges the very structure of human knowledge. We live in a world that is utterly saturated with complex systems. I mean, just look around you right now. The smartphone you might be listening on, the car you drive, the air conditioning, even the simple mechanics of a ballpoint pen.
They're everywhere.
Everywhere. We interact with these things constantly, every day. And because of this constant interaction, we develop this powerful sense of familiarity with them. We feel like we know them. Yet, as the toilet theory points out so well, this deeply ingrained sense of familiarity is almost always mistaken for genuine understanding.
That's the key distinction, familiarity versus understanding.
Exactly. And that distinction sets the stage for a much deeper analysis of this really widespread cognitive state that affects us all. It forces us to ask, what do I really know, and why am I so convinced that I know it?
I wonder, as you're listening to this, have you ever experienced that exact moment? That sudden, whoosh, drop in confidence when you're asked to explain something you absolutely thought you knew inside out.
We all have, I
I
suspect.
know I have. Just last week, I was trying to explain how a basic car engine works to a friend. And let's just say I ended up gesturing wildly and resorting to it just, well, it works
Yep.
more times than I'd like to admit.
Laugh slightly. The universal explanation.
Totally. It's like our brain plays this trick on us.
Yep.
Make us feel like we're experts when we're actually just, skimming the surface. It's the mental equivalent of knowing the book cover, maybe the title,
Yeah.
but having no clue about the actual plot.
That's a great analogy.
Now, here's where it gets really interesting, because there's another layer to this whole thing. We've called this next part the toilet paradox.
Mm-hmm. Paradox.
This paradox emerges when you actually present the toilet theory, the idea we just discussed to other people. What happens?
Well, they tend to accept it, don't they?
They do. They don't really question it. Instead, they readily and often quite quickly accept it as a plausible, maybe even an established academic concept.
Yeah.
They nod along, oh yeah, that makes sense. People do overestimate, almost without any verification.
And that uncritical acceptance right there is what clarifies the paradox. It perfectly validates the theory itself.
How so?
Because their understanding of this new theory, the toilet theory they just heard and accepted, falls into precisely the same illusion of understanding they just acknowledged exists.
Wow.
They heard it, it sounded plausible, it resonated with that feeling we talked about, so they accepted it without really digging deeper, without checking its origins or scientific backing.
So it forms a loop.
A perfect self-referential loop. It's not just an extension of the original idea. It's a dynamic demonstration of these cognitive blind spots operating on two distinct levels.
2 levels. Okay, break that down.
Right. So the first level, as we've discussed, is the initial illusion itself.
Mm.
We overestimate our understanding of how things work, like the toilet.
Mm.
We think we grasp the mechanics, but we don't. Not really.
Got it. Level 1, misunderstanding the toilet.
Level 2, revealed by the paradox, is more subtle. It's that when we encounter new information, especially information that sounds plausible and maybe confirms some vague intuition we already have.
Like the toilet theory confirming our feeling of not knowing things.
Exactly. We similarly overestimate our judgment about that new information. We tend to accept it uncritically, without really verifying its status or exploring its nuances.
So we misunderstand the theory about misunderstanding.
Precisely. This paradox really forces us to ask not just why do we think we know what we know, but maybe even more profoundly, why do we so easily believe? Why do we uncritically accept a theory that basically explains our own lack of understanding? It's a fascinating cognitive loop-the-loop.
So the very act of hearing this theory about our lack of understanding kind of proves the theory itself, because we accept it so readily without checking. That's quite a twist.
It is.
It suggests a deep-seated vulnerability in how we process information, doesn't it?
It really does. A cognitive shortcut that can backfire.
So as you can probably tell, this deep dive is going to be quite a journey. We've mapped out a clear path, taking us from this intriguing personal theory, this toilet theory, into the realm of actual scientific inquiry.
Yes, and to navigate this journey properly, we'll be delving into several key concepts. It's important to get the terminology right.
Okay.
First, we'll formally explore the psychological concept that directly maps onto the toilet theory. It's called the Illusion of Explanatory Depth, or IOED.
IOED. Got it.
Then we'll need to clarify its important distinctions from and connections to another very famous cognitive bias, the Dunning-Kruger effect. People often confuse the two.
Yes, Dunning-Kruger. That comes up a lot.
It does. After that, we'll use some robust psychological theories, particularly confirmation bias, to meticulously deconstruct the precise psychological mechanisms behind the toilet paradox, that curious, uncritical acceptance we just talked about.
Okay, so IOED for the basic illusion, confirmation bias for the paradox part.
Exactly. And then, to bring it all home, we'll trace this back to the ancient wisdom of the Greek philosopher Socrates. His concept of knowledge of ignorance offers timeless solutions.
Socrates knew about this.
In essence, yes. And finally, we'll introduce some incredibly practical, modern tools, like the Feynman Technique, to provide concrete methods for cultivating genuine, verifiable understanding in your own life.
Great.
So yes, we're definitely starting with the humble household toilet, but our destination is a much deeper comprehension of the fascinating and often surprising workings of the human mind.
It's incredible how a simple observation like the toilet theory really captures such a widespread mental glitch. But it's not just a clever idea someone had, is it?
Right.
It has a formal name in psychology, right?
Yeah.
You mentioned IOED.
That's absolutely right. Back in 2002, two Yale University psychologists, Leonid Rosenblatt and Frank Keel, formally introduced this concept. They called it the Illusion of Explanatory Depth, or IOED.
IOED.
They published it in a groundbreaking paper. Its title was The Misunderstood Limits of Folk Science, an Illusion of Explanatory Depth.
Okay, so what's the formal definition then?
Well, IOED is essentially a cognitive bias, where people believe they understand complex phenomena with far greater precision, coherence, and depth than they actually do. Our perception of our own knowledge depth is, quite literally, an illusion.
That maps perfectly onto the toilet theory.
Perfectly. People feel they understand how a toilet works, or a zipper, or a bicycle, until they're explicitly asked to explain it. And then they discover the surprising poverty, the shallowness of their actual knowledge.
And it's not just for simple things like toilets.
Oh no. Crucially, IOED isn't limited to simple man-made objects. It's prevalent in how we view complex scientific domains, things like genetics or climate change. It affects our understanding of the intricacies of economic markets, the subtle nuances of mental illnesses, and even highly charged political issues.
Wow. Okay, so it's everywhere.
It's a very widespread human tendency to overestimate the granularity, the detail of our own explanations for how the world works.
That definition makes a lot of sense, but how on earth do researchers even begin to test something like that? It sounds so internal, so subtle. What did Rosenblatt and Keel actually do to, as you put it earlier, puncture this illusion?
That's an excellent question, because measuring an illusion is tricky. Their experimental design was actually quite ingenious in systematically revealing and, importantly, quantifying this illusion.
Okay, how did it work?
Well, their experiments typically involved several phases. First, they'd present participants, often Yale students, actually with a list of common everyday items, things like sewing machines, crossbows, cell phones, even car transmissions.
Real mix of stuff.
Right. And participants were then asked simply to rate their understanding of how each item worked on a scale, usually 1 to 7. How well do you understand this?
And I guess they rated themselves pretty highly at first.
Unsurprisingly, yes. At this initial stage, most people gave relatively high scores, reflecting that general sense of confidence, that familiarity we talked about.
Okay, phase 1, high confidence. What's next?
Then came the real test, the crucial part. Researchers would select a few of these items and instruct the participants to write a detailed, specific, step-by-step causal explanation of how they worked.
The explain it part.
Exactly. For example, they might be asked to explain, how does a cylinder lock work? Detail every step. This task was designed specifically to force participants to transition from that vague, abstract sense of familiarity, yeah, I know what a lock is, to a concrete, explicit causal statement. Okay, the key pushes these pins, which align with,
And that's where the gaps appear.
immediately. This direct confrontation exposed the gaps, the inconsistencies, sometimes the outright fractures in their supposed knowledge. They couldn't just say they knew, they had to show it step by step. And in doing so, the illusion began to unravel right there on the page.
So after they struggled through that explanation,
Following this challenging explanation task, participants were asked to reevaluate their understanding of that same item using the exact same 7-point scale.
and the result.
The results were remarkably consistent across all their experiments and statistically significant. The second confidence rating was dramatically lower than the first.
Wow.
This sharp, measurable drop in scores objectively quantified the collapse of the illusion of explanatory depth. When people were forced to confront their actual inability to provide a coherent explanation, that false sense of understanding just vanished.
So it's not just a feeling, it's measurable.
It's measurable, but they didn't stop there. To further validate their findings and to make sure participants weren't just experiencing a general loss of confidence from, being put on the spot.
Right, maybe they just felt dumb after trying.
Exactly. So they included a crucial control step. After the re-rating, participants were given an expert explanation of how the item worked to read, a clear, concise breakdown.
Okay.
After absorbing this actual detailed information, their confidence ratings would then, quite reasonably, rise again, sometimes even higher than their initial rating, but now based on real knowledge.
So it shows the drop wasn't just frustration.
Precisely. It demonstrated that the observed drop in confidence wasn't a random fluctuation or mere frustration. It was a specific calibration, a moment of genuine self-discovery about the true state of their knowledge. It showed the illusion was indeed punctured by the attempt to explain, but genuine understanding, when provided, could rebuild confidence on a much more solid foundation.
That's brilliant. It really is like a mental pressure test. It makes you want to try it yourself, doesn't it?
It does.
So to our listeners, maybe next time you're feeling confident about how something works, pause.
Yeah.
Try to explain it out loud or on paper. Maybe imagine explaining it to an imaginary 6-year-old. You might be surprised what you find.
Definitely a worthwhile exercise, and this actually leads to an important clarification about IOED. It doesn't apply equally to all types of knowledge.
Oh, how so?
The research clearly indicates that this illusion, this gap between perceived and actual understanding, is strongest for explanatory knowledge.
Explanatory knowledge. You mean like how things work?
Yeah, exactly. The kind of knowledge that involves understanding complex causal patterns, the how and the why things operate the way they do. It's all about the underlying mechanisms and processes.
Okay, so it's strong for how things work. What about other kinds of knowledge?
Well, it stands in stark contrast to other types where the illusion is much weaker or maybe non-existent. For example, think about factual knowledge.
Like capital cities.
Right. What is the capital of France? It's typically binary. You either know it's Paris or you don't. There's very little room for an illusion of depth there. You can't really sort of know the capital.
True.
Or consider procedural knowledge, like how do you ride a bicycle?
How do you do it?
Right. This knowledge is largely stored in our muscle memory. It's embodied. We can do it. But we generally understand, we're quite self-aware, that we can't necessarily explain the precise physics or the complex neural commands involved. We know we just do it, and we don't usually claim deep explanatory understanding of the biomechanics.
Okay, facts and skills are different. Any others?
One more is narrative knowledge, like what is the plot of Hamlet? Your level of understanding for a story or narrative is relatively easy to self-assess. You know, if you remember the characters, the key events, the ending, it's hard to have a deep illusion about whether you remember the story.
That makes sense.
So the toilet theory, focusing specifically on how things work, fits perfectly, smack dab into this domain of explanatory knowledge. And that's precisely why this illusion, IOED, is such a common, pervasive feature of our everyday cognitive experience. It hits right where our explanations are often weakest.
So what does this all mean for us then? Why does our brain trick us like this? It feels like a bug in our mental software.
Chuckles. It's maybe less of a bug and more of a feature based on efficiency. It's a series of cognitive shortcuts that, in many situations, are actually quite efficient. They save mental energy. But in the specific context of needing detailed understanding, they lead us astray.
Okay, so what are these shortcuts? Why does IOED happen?
There are several proposed psychological theories. One key reason is simply confusing familiarity with understanding.
We touched on that earlier.
Right. In our hyper-connected, information-rich modern world, we're constantly bombarded with information, but often our engagement with it is incredibly superficial. You mentioned headlines earlier.
Yeah, that study finding most people only read headlines.
Exactly. A 2014 study found about 60% of shared links aren't even clicked, let alone read. We constantly see, use, and talk about complex things, quantum computing, economic models, political policies. But this high degree of superficial familiarity with the terms or the general concepts gets mistakenly tagged by our brain as deep understanding of their actual mechanisms.
So recognizing the word isn't the same as understanding the process.
Not at all. We mistake recognizing the label for mastering the intricate processes behind it.
Okay, familiarity trap. What else?
Another major contributing factor is something called change blindness, which relates to memory. Our memory, contrary to what we might like to believe, isn't like a high-definition video recorder playing back events perfectly.
Right, it's reconstructive.
It is. And when an object or system isn't physically present right in front of us, our memory of its specific details is actually quite vague and often incomplete. Yet, despite this vagueness, we significantly overestimate our ability to recall these details accurately.
Can you give an example?
The classic example is the bicycle drawing task. Most people confidently believe they know exactly what a bicycle looks like, but when asked to draw one from memory, they often produce structurally impossible drawings, forgetting where the chain connects, how the pedals attach to the gears, things like that.
I've seen those drawings. They can be quite funny.
They can, but they illustrate this fundamental blindness to our own cognitive deficiencies. We can't fully reconstruct complex details from memory, yet we operate under the illusion that we possess a comprehensive, ready-to-explain understanding. We think the blueprint is clear in our head when it's actually quite fuzzy.
So faulty memory adds to the illusion. is there a third factor?
Yes, and it relates to how we structure complexity. Let's call it the illusion of levels. Our brains are natural simplifiers, they have to be, to cope with the world.
Right.
When confronted with complex systems, we tend to think about them hierarchically, in layers or levels of abstraction. For instance, you might be able to describe the high-level structure of a computer. Okay, it's got a screen, a keyboard, a mouse, and, the main box with a motherboard inside.
Sure, the basic components.
Right. But when we can articulate these high-level components, we mistakenly generalize that ability. We develop a false confidence that we also understand the deeper, more complex, and often interdependent interactions between these components. How does the CPU actually talk to the RAM? How does the graphics card process data?
We assume knowing the parts means knowing how they work together.
Exactly. The ability to describe one level of abstraction gets incorrectly generalized into a false belief of knowing the system at all levels of detail. So these three things, confusing familiarity with understanding, change blindness due to memory limits, and the illusion of levels together, create the fertile ground for the illusion of explanatory depth to constantly flourish.
So our brains are basically choosing speed and efficiency over deep precision, which, I guess, makes a lot of sense for everyday survival. You don't need to know how the toilet works to use it.
Precisely. It's usually good enough.
But it also means we're constantly building these shallow understandings without even realizing it. Now, when we talk about overconfidence in one's knowledge, the name that always pops up is the Dunning-Kruger effect. You mentioned we need to differentiate these. How does IOED relate to or differ from Dunning-Kruger? They sound kind of similar.
That's a really crucial point, and they do often get confused, so it's worth clarifying. While both the illusion of explanatory depth and the Dunning-Kruger effect involve aspects of overconfidence, their core mechanisms and their scope, what they apply to, are fundamentally different. Getting this distinction right is vital for precise analysis.
Okay, lay it out for us. What's Dunning-Kruger again?
Right, so the Dunning-Kruger effect, proposed by psychologists David Dunning and Justin Kruger back in 1999, is a cognitive bias where individuals with low ability at a specific task tend to overestimate their own performance and overall ability at that task.
Low ability people thinking they're good.
Essentially, yes. The heart of the effect is a misevaluation of one's own skill or competence. Its classic finding is that the worst performers, those with the least actual ability, are often the least aware of their own incompetence. They lack the metacognitive skill to recognize their own failings.
So their self-assessment is way off.
Way off. Their perceived ability versus their actual ability shows the greatest discrepancy for the lowest performers.
Okay, so how is that different from IOED, which feels like it affects almost everyone, not just low performers?
Exactly. That's a key difference right there. Let's break it down systematically. First, consider the object of assessment. What is being misjudged? For IOED, it's the depth of your explanatory understanding. The question is, how much do I know about how this system works?
Right, the how.
For Dunning-Kruger, the misjudgment is about your personal skill or performance. The question is, how well did I do on this test? Or how good am I at this skill compared to others?
So knowing how versus knowing how well.
Precisely. Second, the primary domain. IOED primarily applies to explanatory knowledge, as we discussed how zippers, toilets, economies, or policies function. Dunning-Kruger is typically seen in the domain of skills and abilities, things like logical reasoning, grammar, driving, humor, even emotional intelligence.
Okay, different domains. What about who gets affected?
This is a big one. IOED seems to affect nearly everyone, including experts when they step outside their specific domain of expertise. A brilliant physicist might still have IOED about biology or plumbing.
Right.
Dunning-Kruger, however, primarily affects individuals with low to moderate competence in a specific domain. Highly competent individuals in that domain usually have much more accurate self-assessments, or sometimes even underestimate their relative skill. That's called imposter syndrome, a different phenomenon.
So IOED is universal. Dunning-Kruger targets lower competence.
Generally speaking, yes. And finally, the key finding, or how it manifests. For IOED, the key finding is that confidence drops significantly after you attempt to explain something. That confrontation reveals the illusion.
The aha, I don't know moment.
Right. For Dunning-Kruger, the key finding is that the worst performers show the largest discrepancy, the biggest bias, in estimating their own rank or performance compared to their peers. They're the most overconfident relative to their actual ability.
Okay, that distinction is much clearer now. Can you give us a simple analogy?
Sure. IOED is like saying, I thought I knew exactly how a zipper worked, but now that you asked me to explain the teeth interlocking, I'm kind of stumped. Dunning-Kruger is more like saying, I'm absolutely sure I aced that grammar test, even though you actually got half the questions wrong because you don't recognize your own grammatical errors.
Got it. So the toilet theory is definitely IOED.
Clearly. It aligns perfectly with the illusion of explanatory depth. That top physicist we mentioned, who is likely immune to Dunning-Kruger in physics due to high competence, is still very likely to experience a profound IOED when asked to explain in detail how their own household toilet functions.
Makes sense.
So IOED reveals this kind of universal hollowness in our knowledge, the superficiality hiding beneath our everyday familiarity. Dunning-Kruger, on the other hand, reveals more about that specific and sometimes problematic link between a lack of competence and an inflated sense of arrogance about one's abilities. They're distinct, but both highlight crucial aspects of our human cognitive limitations.
Okay, that's a really vital distinction. So we've seen how our brains fool us about what we think we know, that's IOED. But then there's that fascinating second layer, the paradox. We often accept a theory about this self-deception, like our toilet theory, without really questioning it. What's driving that?
Right, to unravel that more subtle aspect, the uncritical acceptance seen in the toilet paradox, we need to bring in another incredibly powerful and frankly pervasive psychological concept, confirmation bias.
Confirmation bias. Okay, I've heard of this one.
Most people have, but its influence is often underestimated. It's a fundamental cognitive tendency for people to selectively search for, interpret, favor, and recall information in a way that confirms or supports their pre-existing beliefs or hypotheses.
So we look for things that agree with us.
We do. And crucially, at the same time, we tend to ignore, downplay, rationalize away, or actively devalue any evidence that contradicts those beliefs. It's generally not a conscious, malicious act of ignoring facts, but more like our brains naturally gravitating towards information that feels comfortable, that fits our existing mental framework.
It's like our default setting is confirm.
It often seems that way. Confirmation bias is ubiquitous. It influences how we process information, how we form beliefs, and it affects almost every aspect of our decision-making. It typically manifests in three main ways.
Okay, what are they?
First, there's bias search for information. When we're looking for answers or data, we subconsciously tend to formulate questions or conduct searches in ways that are more likely to yield affirmative answers, answers that support what we already think. Can you give an example?
Sure. Let's say you believe dogs are superior pets. You might type into a search engine, evidence that dogs are better than cats, or why dogs make the best pets.
Instead of something neutral like pros and cons of dogs versus cats.
Exactly. By framing the search that way, you ensure you primarily encounter information that supports your initial premise. You're steering the information flow towards confirmation from the outset.
So it's not just that we prefer certain information when we see it, it's that we actively seek out ways to prove ourselves right, even in how we ask questions.
Precisely. It's like creating our own personal echo chamber on demand. And it gets even more interesting when you look at the second manifestation. Biased interpretation of information.
How does that work?
Even when you're presented with the exact same piece of information, maybe an ambiguous news report or a complex data set as someone who holds an opposing view, you will tend to interpret that information in a way that aligns with and reinforces your own pre-existing views.
So two people see the same thing but reach opposite conclusions all the time. They filter it through their own biases, interpreting ambiguities or complexities in a way that fits their preferred narrative. This is a huge reason why factual debates can be so frustratingly unproductive sometimes.
Okay, biased search, biased interpretation. What's the third one?
The third is biased recall. Our memories, as we discussed with change blindness, are not perfectly objective archives. We are significantly more likely to vividly remember events, facts, arguments, and details that support our beliefs, while conveniently forgetting, downplaying, or misremembering those that contradict them.
Our memory edits the past to fit the present belief.
In a way, yes. This selective memory reinforces our internal narratives and convictions, making our beliefs feel even more robust and evidence-based over time than they truly might be. These three manifestations, bias, search, interpretation, and recall, work together, constantly shaping our perception of reality to align with what we already believe.
It's incredible, almost scary, how our brains seem wired to confirm rather than genuinely challenge what we already suspect.
Yeah.
So let's connect this back. How do IOED and confirmation bias work together to create that elegant, self-referential loop of the toilet paradox? You said it was a two-stage process.
You're absolutely right. The subtlety lies in the interaction. It's not just confirmation bias acting in isolation. It's an intricately linked two-stage process involving both the illusion of explanatory depth and confirmation bias. Let's try to explain this mechanism carefully.
Okay.
First stage, IOED creates the pre-existing belief. Now, this isn't usually a conscious, articulated belief, but before the toilet theory is even mentioned, most people harbor a vague, latent, often unspoken awareness of their own IOED.
How so?
Think about it. You might have felt that flicker of intellectual shallowness when you tried, and maybe failed, to assemble that flat-pack furniture without clear instructions. Or perhaps you struggled to fix a simple appliance, or found yourself unable to clearly articulate a complex concept you thought you understood during a conversation.
Right, those frustrating moments.
Exactly. This common universal feeling of, I don't seem to understand many things as deeply as I initially thought I did, constitutes an unspoken, a potential pre-existing belief, or maybe a suspicion about one's own cognitive limitations. It's a quiet, subconscious doubt lurking in the background.
Okay, so we have this underlying feeling of maybe I don't know as much as I think.
Right. Then comes the second stage. The toilet theory provides the perfect confirming information. When the toilet theory is presented clearly, concisely, and plausibly perhaps by you, the listener, after hearing this, it acts like a perfect key. It instantly unlocks that vague underlying sense of unease or inadequacy.
It gives it a name.
Precisely. It gives a name, a formal-sounding label, illusion of explanatory depth, and a coherent, plausible explanation, we mistake familiarity for understanding, to that universal feeling you've likely experienced about the limits of your own understanding. Your brain goes, aha, so that's what that feeling is. It's an illusion of explanatory depth.
It clicks because it matches the feeling.
It clicks. And this is where confirmation bias activates, completing the paradox. Because the toilet theory so perfectly confirms those pre-existing subconscious suspicions about their own cognitive limitations, that gut feeling that their understanding is often shallow confirmation bias immediately kicks into high gear.
The brain says, yes, this fits.
Exactly. Their brain quickly flags the theory as true and important and accepts it with minimal scrutiny. At this point, the motivation to seek out contradictory evidence, or even just to verify if the toilet theory is a real, established academic term, is greatly diminished. It basically drops to near zero.
Why bother questioning something that feels so right?
Why would you? Questioning a theory that has just so perfectly validated a deep-seated, though perhaps unspoken feeling or intuition you already held would cause significant cognitive discomfort, a feeling psychologists call cognitive dissonance. Accepting it feels good. It resolves that latent uncertainty.
So the complete picture of the toilet paradox is,
It's this. The widespread, universal illusion of explanatory depth, IOED, provides the incredibly fertile cognitive ground. It creates the underlying doubt. Then, confirmation bias doesn't just appear, it absolutely flourishes when presented with information like the toilet theory that confirms that doubt. People don't believe in the toilet paradox or accept the toilet theory out of thin air. They accept it precisely because it powerfully confirms a truth they had already vaguely sensed about their own cognitive state, that they often overestimate their own knowledge. It's a beautifully simple, yet profoundly insightful demonstration of these two major biases interacting in a social context.
that's fascinating, a true cognitive echo chamber, where the echo confirms our suspicion about the chamber itself. It makes so much sense now why we're often quick to accept things that just resonate with our vague intuitions, even without solid proof. Are there other factors, maybe social pressures or other mental shortcuts, that make this paradox even stronger, making us even less likely to pause and check the facts?
Absolutely. Beyond that core IOED confirmation bias mechanism we just detailed, there are definitely several additional social psychological factors that further exacerbate the toilet paradox, making us even more prone to this kind of uncritical acceptance.
Like what?
Well, one major factor relates to cognitive heuristics and the social cost of questioning. The human brain, as we've hinted, is often described as a cognitive miser. It constantly seeks to use mental shortcuts or heuristics to conserve precious mental energy and processing power.
Lazy brain theory.
Chuckles. A bit harsh, but efficient, let's say. Now imagine you're in a social setting, a conversation. You hear a plausible-sounding statement, especially one that includes a formal-sounding phrase like theory or refers to some study. Your brain instinctively performs a quick, subconscious cost-benefit analysis.
Okay.
The perceived cost of questioning such a statement in a casual conversation can actually feel surprisingly high. You might fear appearing ignorant. What? You haven't heard of the toilet theory, everyone knows that. Or you might worry about disrupting the natural flow of the conversation, making things awkward.
Yeah, nobody wants to be that person who questions everything.
Right. Conversely, the perceived cost of simply accepting the statement, nodding along, is usually very low, often negligible. It keeps the social gears running smoothly. Therefore, from both a social and a cognitive efficiency standpoint, uncritical acceptance often becomes the most efficient and least effortful strategy. It's just easier to agree and move on.
The path of least resistance.
Definitely. And another powerful force closely related to this is the fundamental human drive to avoid cognitive dissonance, a theory famously proposed by psychologist Leon Festinger back in the 1950s.
Cognitive dissonance. That's when holding conflicting ideas feels bad.
Exactly. Cognitive dissonance arises when a person simultaneously holds two or more contradictory ideas, beliefs, values, or attitudes. It creates a state of psychological tension and discomfort. In the context of the toilet paradox, this might involve holding the idea, this toilet theory sounds very reasonable and it explains something I've definitely felt alongside the idea, but wait, I should be skeptical and verify new information before just accepting it.
Holding both feels uncomfortable.
It does. That clash creates dissonance. To alleviate this discomfort, the brain seeks resolution, often taking the path of least resistance. In many cases, the easiest and quickest way to resolve this internal conflict is to simply abandon one of the conflicting ideas, and often it's the skepticism that gets jettisoned in favor of fully accepting the plausible-sounding theory.
So you ditch the doubt to feel consistent again.
Precisely. Embracing the plausible theory fully resolves the tension, making you feel internally consistent again. So rather than expending the mental effort required to critically evaluate the new information or reconcile the conflicting thoughts, we simply adopt the belief that causes the least immediate discomfort.
Wow. So social ease and avoiding mental discomfort both push us towards accepting things without checking. This sounds like it has implications far, far beyond just understanding how our household appliances work or accepting fun little theories.
Absolutely.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, what does the toilet paradox and its underlying mechanisms, IOED, confirmation bias, dissonance avoidance, tell us about how we engage with really complex and important issues, say in politics or public policy?
You've hit on a profoundly important point. While the toilet paradox itself might seem relatively harmless, perhaps even amusing, its underlying cognitive mechanisms can have incredibly significant, sometimes even dangerous consequences in these broader social and political spheres.
How so?
Well, there's fascinating research by Philip Fernbach and his colleagues that directly links the illusion of explanatory depth to the tendency towards political extremism.
Really? IOED and extremism.
Yes. Their experiments revealed a really powerful insight. They took people with strong opinions on complex policies, things like implementing a single-payer healthcare system, or introducing a flat tax, or cap-and-trade systems for carbon emissions.
Okay, real hot-button issues.
Exactly. And they divided participants. One group was asked to simply state their position and provide reasons for why they supported or opposed the policy. The other group was asked to do something different. They were asked to explain the precise mechanics of the policy.
Not why they supported it, but how it would actually work.
Precisely. Step by step, causally. How would a single-payer system actually operate? How would a flat tax specifically impact different income brackets in the overall economy? They had to trace the causal chain.
It's just like trying to explain the toilet.
Exactly the same principle. And what happened? The people asked to explain the mechanics very quickly realized how superficial their actual understanding was. They hit that wall of complexity. This moment of forced explanation triggered their IOED, leading to a significant sense of cognitive humility.
And the key finding.
The key finding was that this sudden realization of their own shallow understanding significantly reduced the extremity of their stance on that issue. Their positions became noticeably more moderate after trying, and largely failing, to explain the nuts and bolts.
Wow. Just trying to explain made them less extreme.
Yes. The act of confronting their own lack of deep understanding led to greater intellectual humility and tempered their confidence in their strong position.
But what about the other group? The ones asked for reasons.
Well, the research found that when people were asked instead to simply give reasons to support their pre-existing position, the result was the exact opposite. This request immediately triggered their confirmation bias.
They just listed all the points supporting their side.
Exactly. They instinctively recalled and articulated only the arguments and pieces of information that supported their viewpoint, actively ignoring or downplaying any counter-arguments or complexities. And this process didn't lead to humility at all. It actually made their original stance even more entrenched and often more extreme. They felt more justified and confident in their existing beliefs after rehearsing their reasons.
That is a powerful distinction. Explain versus give reasons.
Incredibly powerful. And it reveals something profound about our current political and social landscape, doesn't it? Our everyday public debates, our arguments on social media, even many news segments are overwhelmingly structured around an exchange of reasons.
We just throw talking points back and forth.
Constantly. We throw out arguments that support our side, which, as this research clearly shows, just continually reinforces everyone's confirmation bias and deepens the partisan divisions.
So what's the alternative?
Well, what might truly promote understanding, foster that crucial intellectual humility, and perhaps even start to bridge some divides, is to encourage each other and ourselves to shift the focus, to move from demanding reasons to gently inviting explanations of the underlying causal mechanisms.
Asking how would that actually work in practice?
Precisely. The very kind of thinking that the toilet theory implicitly advocates for when it highlights our lack of mechanistic understanding. Asking how encourages a level of cognitive humility that is often sorely lacking in public discourse. So, from this perspective, the toilet theory isn't just a cognitive quirk about everyday objects. It could be seen as a powerful diagnostic tool, and maybe even a hint towards a method for engaging in more effective and constructive dialogue on the complex, often polarizing issues we face.
Okay, so if this illusion of explanatory depth is so pervasive, affecting everything from toilets to politics, and if confirmation bias constantly reinforces our shallow beliefs, well, naturally, this raises a really important question. What can we actually do about it? Are we just stuck in these cognitive loops? How do we counteract these powerful tendencies?
That's the critical question, isn't it? And fortunately, humanity has been grappling with the nature of knowledge, ignorance, and self-deception for millennia. The good news is that both ancient philosophical wisdom and modern learning science offer surprisingly congruent and, I think, powerful remedies. We're not helpless.
Okay, where do we start? Ancient wisdom first.
Let's go back over 2 millennia to ancient Athens. The philosopher Socrates was, in essence, a pioneering figure in combating precisely what we now call the illusion of explanatory depth.
Socrates again.
Hailed as the father of Western philosophy, his core philosophical practice, what we now know as the Socratic method, is, when you look closely, a systematic IOED detector.
How did it work as an IOED detector?
Well, Socrates would frequently engage in dialogue with people in the Athenian marketplace, the agora. He particularly sought out those who claimed to possess great wisdom, politicians, poets, skilled artisans. He'd begin with what seemed like a deceptively simple question, like, what is justice? Or what is courage? Or what is piety?
Things people thought they understood.
Exactly. Then, through a relentless series of interlocking questions, a process the Greeks called elenchus, which is basically a rigorous cross-examination, he would guide his conversation partners to try and explain their own definitions. He pushed them to articulate the precise causal mechanisms, the underlying principles, the implications of their concepts.
Forcing the explanation, just like the IOED experiments.
Precisely. And the almost inevitable result, as Plato's dialogues vividly record, was that these supposedly wise individuals would quickly fall into self-contradiction or find their definitions were vague and insufficient. They were forced to admit, often grudgingly, that they didn't truly understand the very concepts they thought they knew so well. That intellectual experience is spiritually identical to the modern experiments by Rosenblit and Kiel. The act of being forced to explain reveals the underlying lack of depth.
So Socrates was puncturing illusions way back then.
Yeah.
What about his famous saying, I know that I know nothing? How does that fit in?
Ah, yes. A more nuanced understanding of that phrase is crucial here. It wasn't a statement of absolute nihilism, like he was saying knowledge is impossible or his mind was a total blank slate.
Right, it sounds almost defeatist taken literally.
It does. Instead, it expresses a very high level of metacognitive awareness. Socrates, through his questioning, realized there is a difference between a kind of divine, perfect wisdom, possessing absolute knowledge of the true essence of things, and the more limited human wisdom available to us. After talking to all the so-called wise men of Athens, he found that while they might be skilled in their specific crafts, a potter knew pottery, a general knew strategy, they mistakenly generalized this skill. They believed they were knowledgeable about all things, the big questions like justice and virtue. They crucially lacked an awareness of the limits of their own knowledge.
They didn't know where their expertise ended.
Exactly. Socrates' unique human wisdom, the reason the oracle at Delphi supposedly called him the wisest man, lay precisely in his keen awareness that he did not possess that godlike, absolute knowledge of everything. He knew the limits of his own explanatory depth. He understood that his understanding was finite and often shallow outside specific areas.
So knowing what he didn't know made him wise?
Precisely. It was this profound self-awareness of knowing what he did not know that, paradoxically, made him wiser than those who mistakenly believed they knew everything, but in reality, as Socrates put it, did not know what they did not know. That self-awareness, that intellectual humility, is the philosophical cornerstone for combating IOED.
That's a really powerful historical connection. It feels like humanity has been grappling with this very illusion for millennia, just using different terms. So if Socrates gives us the philosophical diagnosis and the importance of self-awareness, what's the modern treatment plan? How do we move from philosophy to practical tools we can use today to cultivate that true understanding?
Great question. The modern remedy, a practical technique for actively combating the illusion of explanatory depth, comes in the form of the Feynman Technique.
Richard Feynman, the physicist.
The Nobel laureate physicist, yes. A brilliant communicator as well as scientist. His technique offers a concrete, actionable treatment plan, and you can really see it as a powerful, practical tool for actively preventing and curing IOED in your own learning.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What is the Feynman Technique?
Well, Feynman famously encapsulated the core spirit of his technique with a brilliant, often quoted line. If you can't explain something to a 6-year-old, you don't really understand it yourself.
Simple language is key.
That's the absolute heart of it. It's not just a catchy phrase. It's the operational principle for achieving genuine, robust understanding. The technique itself is essentially an iterative learning loop consisting of 4 simple yet profoundly effective steps.
Okay, let's hear them. Step 1.
Step 1, choose a concept. Simple enough. Take a blank sheet of paper and right at the very top, write down the name of the concept or topic you want to learn and genuinely understand. This could be anything: quantum mechanics, how photosynthesis works, the rules of a complex board game, maybe even how your company's pension plan functions.
Okay, pick your topic. Step 2.
Step 2, teach it to a novice. Now, pretend you are teaching this concept to someone who knows absolutely nothing about it. Imagine a curious child, or maybe just an intelligent friend who's in a completely different field. Using your own simple, direct, and non-technical language, explain the concept aloud, and importantly, write down everything you say on that sheet of paper.
Write it down as you explain it simply.
Yes. The key here is to rigorously avoid any jargon or overly complex terminology. If you find yourself slipping into technical terms you can't easily define, that's a red flag. That's a sign you might not understand it deeply enough yourself.
Got it. Avoid jargon. Explain simply. Step 3.
Step 3, identify gaps and review. This is crucial. Inevitably, as you attempt to explain it simply, you will get stuck. You'll hit areas where your explanation becomes unclear, maybe convoluted, or where you find yourself forced to use jargon because you literally can't think of a simpler way to say it.
The sticking points.
Exactly. These sticking points are precisely the boundaries of your current knowledge. They are the cracks, the weak spots in your understanding. At this critical juncture, you must stop, identify the gap, and then return to your original source material, whether it's a textbook, an article, a video, lecture notes, whatever. Go back and relearn and solidify those weak spots. Keep iterating between learning and trying to explain simply until you can fill in those gaps using clear, plain language.
So it's a cycle. Explain, find gaps, review, try explaining again.
It's an active learning loop. And finally, step 4, simplify and use analogies. Once you've gone through the previous steps and you feel you can explain the core concept without getting stuck or resorting to jargon, now refine your explanation even further. Organize it logically, simplify your language as much as possible, and critically try to come up with powerful, intuitive analogies or metaphors that can help someone else grasp the idea more easily. The ultimate goal is to make your explanations so clear, so intuitive, and so easy to digest that pretty much anyone, regardless of their background, could get the gist of it.
Explain simply, find gaps, review, simplify again with analogies. That makes a lot of sense.
And notice the profound symmetry here between the Feynman technique and the IOED experiments we discussed earlier.
How so?
The IOED experiment is fundamentally diagnostic. It reveals the illusion of understanding by forcing an explanation and seeing where it breaks down. The Feynman technique, on the other hand, is prescriptive. It prevents or cures this illusion by making the ability to explain something simply the ultimate goal of the learning process itself.
One finds the problem, the other fixes it.
Exactly. One passively exposes the problem, the other actively provides the solution. The Feynman technique compels us to shift our whole approach to learning moving away from being passive recipients or memorizers of information towards becoming active constructors and architects of our own knowledge. It forces us to build understanding that is genuinely robust, verifiable, and communicable.
That's a fantastic practical roadmap. It really is about building understanding from the ground up, layer by layer, not just recognizing concepts. So if we put all these remedies together, the self-awareness of Socrates, the active learning of Feynman, what's the ultimate goal here? What kind of mindset are we actually aiming to cultivate?
That's the perfect synthesizing question. When you weave together this ancient philosophical wisdom about knowing your limits with modern scientific insights into learning and cognition, the ultimate goal isn't to magically transform into some kind of omniscient sage who knows everything. That's impossible.
Right.
Rather, the aim is to cultivate a deep, profound, and ultimately productive humility. This is precisely what Socrates meant by his famous dictum, know thyself, or what Confucius expressed so elegantly in the Analects. To know what you know and what you do not know, that is true knowledge. It's about mastering the art of self-awareness regarding your own cognitive limits and blind spots.
Productive humility. I like that. What does that look like in practice?
Well, this mindset of productive humility includes several core elements that we can actively work on cultivating in ourselves. First, there's the habit of constant self-scrutiny.
Questioning yourself.
Consistently. We need to make it a regular habit to question our own certainty, especially when we feel most confident. Before confidently declaring, I know, about something complex, we should regularly ask ourselves, do I truly understand the underlying mechanisms here, or do I merely feel a superficial familiarity with the topic? Can I explain its causal chain effectively and simply, or am I just echoing phrases I've heard or headlines I've skimmed? This consistent internal Socratic dialogue is the first and most vital step toward knowing your own ignorance. It forces that deeper level of self-awareness.
Okay, self-scrutiny. What else?
Second, we need to actively embrace complexity. It's crucial to recognize, perhaps internalize, that almost all important issues, whether scientific, social, political, or even personal, are far more complex and nuanced than they typically appear on the surface.
Things are rarely simple.
Rarely. And when we begin to learn a new field, there's often that initial exhilarating burst of confidence. You learn a few key terms, grasp the basics, and suddenly feel like an expert. This is sometimes playfully referred to as the peak of Mount Stupid on the Dunning-Kruger curve graphic.
Right, the peak of confidence before the plunge into realizing how much you don't know.
Exactly. That initial overconfidence is often a telltale sign of our actual ignorance. True experts, by contrast, are typically deeply aware of the intricate complexities, the unknowns, the ambiguities within their field. Consequently, they are far more aware of the limitations of their own knowledge. They understand that the more you learn, the more you realize you don't know.
Humility grows with expertise.
Ideally, yes. And finally, we should strive for viewing ignorance as a starting point, not as an ending or a failure. Admitting I don't know or I don't fully understand this yet is not a sign of weakness, intellectual inadequacy, or something to be ashamed of.
It's okay not to know.
It's more than okay. It is the fundamental starting point of all true learning, exploration, and discovery. As thinkers like Charles Darwin and Bertrand Russell wisely observed, often in slightly different words, ignorance more frequently begets confidence than does knowledge. The truly confident and often arrogant are frequently those who know the least. True wisdom, therefore, begins not with the declaration of certainty, but with the intellectual courage to say, I don't know, coupled with a genuine curiosity and a commitment to try and fill that knowledge void. It frames ignorance not as a deficit, but as an opportunity for growth.
Wow. This has been an incredibly insightful journey. We literally started with a simple observation about a toilet, and we've traveled through the meticulous experiments of cognitive psychology, explored the power of confirmation bias, and even touched on the profound reflections of classical philosophy with Socrates and the practical genius of Feynman. It feels like it's time to bring all these fascinating threads together. Let's try to validate that original insight, maybe extract some really practical wisdom for everyone listening.
Absolutely. Let's synthesize. The toilet theory, that simple idea which sparked our entire discussion today, turns out to be far more than just a witty metaphor or a fun anecdote. It's actually a near-perfect intuitive expression of that core cognitive bias we spent time dissecting, the illusion of explanatory depth, IOED.
It captures IOED really well.
It really does. By focusing on a highly relatable, everyday example, something we all use but rarely think about explaining the toilet theory, brilliantly captures a common cognitive blind spot, a blind spot that most people probably never consciously recognize in their entire lives, despite experiencing its effects constantly.
And what about the toilet paradox part, the uncritical acceptance?
Right. The toilet paradox itself proves to be a brilliant, almost meta, real-world case study. It vividly demonstrates how confirmation bias is precisely triggered when that latent underlying uncertainty caused by our IOED, that background feeling of, I don't quite get this stuff, is suddenly confirmed by a plausible-sounding new theory, the toilet theory itself.
The theory confirms the feeling the theory describes.
Exactly. And aided by those social heuristics, we discuss the desire for cognitive ease, avoiding dissonance, social harmony. This creates that fascinating self-proving loop. Individuals accept a theory about their lack of understanding in the very manner that the theory describes, uncritically. They don't deeply examine the theory about their lack of understanding precisely because it so neatly confirms their vague, pre-existing feeling of lacking understanding.
It's quite elegant in a cognitive bias sort of way.
It is. Ultimately, the toilet theory and its paradox aren't just funny thought experiments. They serve as a powerful lens. They show us how easily we can fool ourselves about what we know, and just how readily we accept ideas that simply echo our existing feelings or biases, often without rigorous checking. It's a masterclass in how our necessary mental shortcuts can sometimes lead us significantly astray.
So after this really deep dive, what does this all mean for us, for the listener? How can we take these insights about IOED, confirmation bias, Socrates, Feynman, and actually apply them to our everyday lives to become maybe a bit more intellectually honest with ourselves and others?
That's the payoff question, right? Based on this comprehensive analysis, I think we can distill a highly practical framework. Think of it as a toolkit aimed at significantly enhancing our intellectual honesty and actively combating these pervasive cognitive illusions. It really boils down to 3 core action guidelines you can start implementing immediately.
Okay, 3 guidelines. What's the first one?
First, think like Socrates. Make it a fundamental conscious habit to turn that spotlight of doubt and critical inquiry inwards upon yourself, not just outwards onto others. Before you confidently declare, I know, about any complex concept, any political policy, any skill you possess, genuinely ask yourself the tough questions. To what extent can I truly explain this with a clear step-by-step causal chain? Is my understanding derived from firsthand, in-depth study and rigorous personal experience, or is it mostly just a vague sense of familiarity I've picked up from secondhand information, headlines, or casual conversations?
Applying the Socratic method to myself.
Exactly. This consistent internal dialogue is the crucial first step toward achieving Socrates' profound goal of knowing your own ignorance. It forces that deeper, often uncomfortable, but necessary level of self-awareness.
Okay, think like Socrates. Guideline 2.
Second, learn like Feynman. Adopt the principle, internalize it, that the ability to explain it simply to a layperson is the absolute gold standard, the true litmus test for genuine knowledge. When you're learning something new, consciously shift your mindset. Move away from merely aiming to memorize facts or definitions and focus instead on actively trying to re-explain the material in your own simple, clear terms using your own analogies.
Make simple explanation the goal.
Make it the goal. If, in the process of trying to explain, you find yourself consistently unable to escape jargon, or if you cannot illustrate your points with vivid, intuitive analogies that make sense to someone outside the field, take that as a clear signal. Your understanding is likely still superficial. This method, practiced regularly, transforms you from a potential victim of IOED into a true master and constructor of your knowledge, ensuring that your comprehension is robust, deep, and communicable.
Right, build real understanding. And the third guideline.
And third, debate to understand, not just to win. This applies especially when you engage in discussions with others, particularly on complex social or political issues where passions often run high and opinions are strong. Consciously try to shift your communication mode. Instead of habitually defaulting to throwing out reasons that support your view, a tendency that, as we've learned from Fernbach's research, often just invites both you and your counterpart into the unproductive trench warfare of confirmation bias and deeper polarization.
Instead of just listing reasons.
Try gently inviting both yourself and others to explain the underlying mechanisms behind the positions or proposals being discussed. Ask probing how questions. Okay, that's an interesting goal, but how do you think this specific policy would actually achieve its stated aims step by step? Or what potential chain reactions or unintended consequences might it encounter in practice?
Shifting from why you believe to how it works.
Precisely. This explain the mechanism approach can gently trigger each other's illusion of explanatory depth. not in an aggressive way, but in a way that fosters a more humble, open, and ultimately more consensus-oriented dialogue. It moves the focus away from defending fixed positions towards collaboratively exploring the complexities of the issue. It encourages potential understanding over just reinforcing existing divides.
Think like Socrates, learn like Feynman, debate to understand. That's a really clear and actionable framework. What an incredible journey this has been. It's truly amazing how much insight, how much depth we can gain from contemplating something as seemingly ordinary and mundane as a toilet.
It really is.
Our journey today, starting with a simple theory about a toilet and ending up in a deep exploration of human cognition, belief formation, confirmation bias, and even the very nature of wisdom itself. It truly proves a profound point, I think. The most insightful philosophical questions, the most revealing scientific inquiries, are often rooted in the careful observation and contemplation of the most ordinary, everyday things in our lives.
The profound is often hidden in the mundane.
Exactly. The toilet theory is far more than just a clever idea or a funny anecdote to share. It's really a profound invitation, an invitation for each of us to confront what we maybe call the ghostly regions of our own minds, those vast areas of supposed knowledge that we believe are brightly lit, clear, and well understood, but which are, in reality, often dark, vague, and surprisingly superficial.
Facing our own mental fog.
Yeah. And acknowledging the existence of these blind spots, recognizing the inherent limits of our own understanding, is not a sign of weakness or intellectual inadequacy. On the contrary, as we've discussed, it's a powerful demonstration of intellectual courage. It's a crucial, necessary step toward genuine intellectual growth and maybe even wisdom.
Couldn't agree more.
In an age like ours, absolutely overflowing with information, yet also marked by increasingly entrenched opinions and polarization, maybe recognizing our own cognitive illusions. Our IOED, our confirmation biases, is perhaps the most important skill we can possess. It truly is the first, and maybe the most crucial, step toward real understanding and true wisdom.
Yeah.
This deep dive has certainly been an illuminating intellectual exploration for me.
For me too. A lot to think about.
Thanks for tuning into this episode. If you enjoyed our content, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell.